Cool. So I think Nick had an item that maybe got removed or deleted because he's not present. But Alexis, did you want to carry on from your point from last week about boards experiments and small A/B testing?
Sure. Sorry if I sound like a robot. I think I need to get like a Wi-Fi extender in this room. It's just may not sound great. Anyway, yeah, we're looking at a little A/B test to onboard onto the process of A/B testing for engineers on plan. So one we thought might be interesting was in boards. This is a really old board, but just the idea of creating a new board and making that a little bit more discoverable. So currently, I mean, there's a lot of things in boards we need to improve or I want to improve, but to create a new board, you have to go into the board and select create new board. It opens a modal. So making that easier to so a small test is the objective here. I'm thinking that we keep this within switcher and just add in for track who's using each. That's kind of what we're thinking, just as an experiment. So looking at this, it was kind of actually really hard trying to think of like the very small change here, but I'm thinking what we can try on MVC is edit where it currently says like edit board. Just move that closer to the title of the board for now. Shorten it to edit, right? Because hopefully they understand the board, and add in just like a new button as well, and track those two items, see what happens. There's like, again, hard to think very, very small. At some point, maybe some data behind that like maximize button, the full screen button, seeing who uses that. And maybe we could kind of hide that a little bit under a menu and put like even just duplicate some of the options here, especially as we might add in a few more things here as well. In the future, of course, there's a lot we would have to overhaul. I'm thinking probably at some point this could be 2 rows just to kind of give it some breathing room. I would like the picker to be like an actual title, right? And have those just like every option be more discoverable in general, but not for MVC. Let me see if I can find. Oh, and then like another idea would be within the board or within the new dropdown in projects and boards. Sorry, I need a copy. In projects and groups, have it either say if you're in a project, new issue board, or if you're in a group, say new epic board. That's just like a really quick idea. I'm not sure. We can keep talking about that, but keep thinking about like, is there better ways to organize this information in that filter bar, improve the filter bar overall, showing applied filters in a better way to do here, but I don't want to attach them here and confuse this MVC. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking. Do y'all have thoughts on like this really quick, small?
I think our filter bar is like a challenge. I've used the filter bar a lot, and you know it's nice in some respects, and it really holds us back in some others. Whereas like a lot of more complicated filtering interactions usually involve some sort of drop down, and then you have like other selectors within that drop down, and basically our search filter pattern is quite unique, and like sometimes I think I don't know what am I trying to say? Is it worthwhile to explore how our filtering could work outside of the search filter pattern, or are we still so tied to that that it's impossible to move outside of it. Because I find similar constraints where you're like, oh, wow, I really need to add a button here. I really need to like use these drop downs in such a small way where I can't read the specific title. There's like so many constraints that we're having to deal with by just using this search filter component that it's a bit of a nightmare. So I know we're doing MVC and all that sort of stuff, but sometimes it's worthwhile to step outside the MVC mindset and think, is this a global optimization versus a local optimization? And if so, what should I be considering? That didn't go with your MVC comment, but hopefully it was useful. I don't know, I'm rambling.
No, I think that makes sense. So you're cutting out. I don't know if it was for me, but I think I got the gist of this issue. But I did create another issue, and there's like a few floating around for boards. But I think to your point, it is something to think through, especially we want to use saved filters as well. So like, how would you build a saved filter, and how would that display versus, even a scoped board, which is basically just a saved filter, and we don't really display that well. So it's like, how do we, justify like those two ideas? And so, yeah, I think not in this issue, but I think that is something we need to figure out. Saved queries, and then especially as we think about like building more complicated queries, what does that look like?
How are you ever going to do an and or statement with the search filter bar? It's just impossible. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's something to explore.
I think Becca, you might want to look at it in co-working, had the vulnerabilities dashboard, do almost like a query building, the not filtering, things like that, and or. So yeah, I think we need to figure that out fairly soon. And then I have that issue floating around for filtering versus just the kind of simple builders. Like, how do we support users that might not be as comfortable doing like the query JQL, right? Like thinking about like Jira, how you have to build all those queries. Like, users don't necessarily want that. Yeah. So how do we avoid that, but also allow that if users want? So I don't know. Nick, I don't know. I haven't figured it out, but I think we should think about searching. And Nick's team, Nick Brandt, has done a lot of really great work for our universal search. Actually really powerful. Like, it has not and or, like, it has all the filters that we need, but we have our search yet, like the GitLab specific. Something to think about.
I was going to ask Alexis if you've ever looked at like the linear app at all.
Not lately, but what do you like about it?
I can share my screen and I can show a couple things. What? Why can't I see a share button? There it is. That's green. That's weird. Yeah, there are a few things that I liked about it. One of the things that I liked especially was their ability to like share a view or a board with an organization. So like, I have a board for like my own issues, but like, I don't really want to share that with everybody at GitLab, but I kind of have to save that view in order to like keep it cached in the list at least. So I thought that was kind of like a neat feature where you can choose to like share or hide if whether or not your organization could see it. But just coming off of a few things that you brought up, like they put like the edit view or edit boards button under, the ellipses button. Similarly, like theirs is just all on the list, like ours are as well. The one thing I did like is like their filter options, but it's just, there's in this case is like it's an or, so improvement, or if I added another one, it's like could be improvement or features would show up in this list. So structurally, there are just some things we can't necessarily change. But yeah, I kind of just liked how they had made some of the things look just pretty like simple and out of the way and lets the board itself do most of the talking here. But yeah, I was just kind of playing around with it, and it made me think of the ideas that you brought up. It's so hard to get like some of these MVCs out there to try and like get to a more cohesive vision, but you do a really great job keeping track of everything. I think you might have like 2 million issues open for improving boards.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues floating around. Yeah, what I'm hearing, I guess, is, and I'm sorry, I know my internet is probably really annoying for y'all. Thinking future states, like thinking about that filter, thinking about like what we can kind of that view so that users can focus on really the Kanban board that they care about and understand what they've applied, like applied filters and options, but not making them so kind of in quote unquote. So yeah, great feedback. And I think we will get there, but I guess just not. But I do feel the pain point as well that Nick, sometimes MVCs are hard because I kind of like put this puzzle piece into this big old puzzle that's, you know, kind of all over the floor. So I don't know, but that's cool. Thank you for sharing that too, Austin.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully it either gives you some more inspiration or maybe even validation of the ideas you already got going.
Yeah, and a lot of tools, even I think like Notion is one that I use that are more just like really like text editors almost, but now they're adding in all these different views. Like you can add a roadmap or a board, or you know, it's just like kind of like this little widget or like component that you're adding into your document. So if you think about it that way, we really don't want this little module of a board to be too complex. Like you need to kind of set it up and just embed it perhaps right in the future. So kind of thinking that way is kind of interesting too. Anyway, I don't want to hog all the time. Blair, is there anything you wanted to mention before we move on to Austin?
No, just agree with Nick as well. Instead of, I don't know the history between our search, but I know traditionally with developers in particular or users, search is so super important, and like a powerful search is so super important. And then just knowing what I've experienced so far already, finding things and connecting things and not reverting to an external search engine when we should just be searching internally, that it's super important. And also a lot of times these large universal components tend to sort of just get long in the tooth, where we just keep slapping things on and slapping things on, and it makes it harder and harder for us to go back and rethink the original component. And this is probably nothing new to you guys, but it's just going to get harder and harder and make the tool possibly worse and worse to use as we go.
Yep, and good point. And like Kristen and I, my PM, our vision is that you could basically build a search, and that's like your overall GitLab. I mean, we haven't totally validated this, but you know, I build a search and like everything in GitLab responds to that, right? Like I go to MRs, I go to wherever, and I see that query that I built. So like, yeah, I think we need to figure this out fairly soon. Okay, Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll share my screen to help walk through this one a little bit. Desktop 2. Okay, so recently during the scorecard that Daniel Posco ran for me, I observed that it was challenging for him to sometimes interpret what is listed in our audit events table, just based off of the descriptors that we're using. Sometimes it's a little unclear, like what an object is or a target, just purely off of its data piece alone. So what I thought as just like the simplest thing to do is consider all the data that we provide to a user through exporting a CSV. So you get some more data that you aren't necessarily exposed with in the table today. as an example, you might get the path to a project as the target, but it's really more useful to know that this was a compliance framework that was modified in project settings. So I was assuming maybe the easiest thing to do would be to add to the table like a secondary row of information underneath the target, like its type, just to help provide more context as to like what it is. So what that might look like is if this is our current table today, where the target's just telling you, hey, here's a project path that doesn't really tell you anything. We just add the target type data in, which would be fine, but you can kind of see down here where like this sucks. It's like a just jammed words together. So maybe I could work with the team to better refine how we write those descriptors so they could be a little bit more clear, or at least parsed clear in the table. But I wasn't sure maybe what y'all were thinking in terms of, do you think maybe just providing the text itself, or like would maybe putting it behind a tooltip be better? I feel like putting it in the table directly is better for accessibility purposes, but it also creates a greater cognitive load on the user. So I was kind of struggling to weigh the pros and cons of each.
My thought is that it's always easier to add it in than to like remove it later. I don't mind seeing the verbiage there personally, but it's also, I don't know how much mobile is playing into this for you at all, but it's worth maybe considering that, of course, you lose the hover in mobile. So you wouldn't necessarily have that ability to see that.
Yeah, the way that I worked with my team to do mobile was at a certain breakpoint, we break each row into, I guess, a single container. So I think in that case, I would at a minimum have to like advise like putting it in the table. But yeah, that would be an argument I think you could say against tooltips is they're not accessible on mobile. So on the flip side of that, I mean, honestly, people probably aren't accessing audit events on mobile anyways. It is more of like an administrative task that kind of happens. So, the typical attention we feel in GitLab.
I'm so sorry, Austin. I'm so bad at gauging pauses. Blair, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, just having a strong mobile background.
Yeah. I mean, I would say graceful degradation, right? Where basically if the tooltips are useful on a larger screen, tablet or above, then you could probably implement them in a way that is tap friendly. Holly, I know we've talked about this before, and my feelings of like, oh, well, maybe it's not used very often in mobile. We should probably just not. That's a pet peeve of mine. Just because being at the bank, there are a lot of screens that internally our dev teams and our product teams are like, whatever, if it doesn't work on mobile, no big deal. But wouldn't it be nice like if it did? And and there's a way to approach it mobile first, Holly, where and if tooltips aren't that useful, you're just sort of layering up on the desktop and whatever experiences, then it's cool. Get rid of them on mobile. There is a way to implement tooltips that are tap friendly, but they're kind of wonky and clunky and not accessible. So I don't know. All that is to say, like, I would optimize all pages for mobile if possible. And if a feature just gets in the way on mobile, get rid of it. Or if it's sort of that sort of additional like layer of productivity, layer of helpful information. If the critical information is there, go ahead and sort of keep it and then get rid of that sort of layered stuff. But yeah, I very much caution against throwing a screen out because a lot of people don't go here. They don't go here yet. You mobile optimize it. People are going to be going to audit events on their phones primarily.
You and I both know, Blair, that some organizations just don't even let you access websites on your own phone. So, especially with GitLab being self-managed, like for example, I could not access GitLab on a mobile device at my last company. Like it just wasn't possible.
Interesting. Well,
So,
we'll work on that.
yeah, it was just
Oh.
a firewall thing, wouldn't permit it. But at the same time, I think logging in general sometimes is a hard thing. It is so data heavy that it can be very easy to overload that mobile screen with tons and tons of data. So maybe this even goes back to an issue I think Daniel Fosco had brought up, or someone else had brought up, like how do you handle like exposing data to users when it gets like super dense, you know, between tables or card views and stuff? There are pros and cons to each. In this case, the table implementation was done first a long time ago. And then from there, we at least tried to make it a little bit more usable on mobile by breaking down into each container, because it was just like scrollable, kind of as it would be now a little bit. There's like a certain breakpoint where it's like a little bit scrollable. I'm not sure where that happens at, but yeah, it was to try and make it so you didn't have to like deal with vertical and horizontal scrolling to compare data rows, which kind of ties into Alexis's next question is like, why can't they have their own column? I would say probably the most important bits of information on this page, especially come from like the action message. Adding another column is like possible. It's just we're just constrained on space, and the more columns we add in, the harder it is to read. So you know, it eventually just becomes an Excel spreadsheet that you have to scroll on anyways. So that's, you know, that's the trade-off is what all can we display in a reasonable width here. We try and keep it focused on what's most important here, and then we give users access to more data if they really need to get to some of the details. I think I was just really struggling with the fact that this in this case is a project, and this in this case is a compliance framework, which is stated technically in the message, but yeah.
I was made a comment in the agenda that would it make sense to instead have customizable tables where you can then add or remove column data that you want pulled out of the CSV, and then the CSV is export for audit tracking purposes, whereas the UI is just strictly visual.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of being able to build your own table is awesome, and probably would be a really sweet feature that we don't obviously have today in GitLab. So again, this goes back to that tension we have between like taking an MVC approach of, hey, like users are struggling to just read the table as it stands today. Like what would be a very flexible option in a vision down the road of being able to build your own tables for audit events. I would probably say today users probably wouldn't benefit tremendously from just being able to customize their own data, solely from the fact that they can just put it in a CSV and open it up in Excel or Google Sheets and do that themselves if they really wanted to anyways. And sometimes they do. Sometimes that is like the way they deliver their artifacts for audits. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things where it'd be cool, but building towards that vision.
Maybe not you, but other users and other parts of the organization definitely would have high value for that. So arguably, like I would say, yeah, MVC is probably not a quick thing to do over one milestone, but
yeah,
the idea of like pitching this as a system-wide update to pajamas to help issues across the organization, this one specifically might be something to bring up.
Yeah.
I mean, not to jump to solutioning or anything, but like that sort of show columns like button, right? Like that would be the quickest, easiest way for us to implement that, and then have just check boxes for whatever, like you were sort of hinting at, Daniel, like
right.
We could populate the drop down that comes out from that button depending on where we are in the environment. it's sometimes more useful in others, maybe not as useful to implement and harder to implement in certain areas, in which case we just drop the button. Yeah, and then we start sort of testing around, are these users who are expecting this button now, like in this area, want it to come over? And if so, we invest the time and energy to bring it over. So I think
Yeah,
that,
that's
I
a good
guess,
point. That's a good point.
the
Not to
breadth
keep
of,
like,
yeah, go ahead,
I
Austin.
was like, not to keep like bring up linear, but I did see that was like a thing. Like you could pick what things you wanted to see on your board. So like attributes of like an issue, like you could have it show the labels or hide the labels, or show the priority or hide the priority, or show the ID or hide the ID. And all it was just a button and then picking like off of a list of toggles essentially. So yeah, I guess that could also be an option. Cool. I think I have a few ideas to go off of there. Are there any that people would feel like super strongly about for like an MVC though? Like if we had to say, all right, we can only do one issue next milestone, we're going to do this first.
Can you rephrase?
Yeah. So just to wrap it up, because I know we're like right at time, and I'll be quick. So if I only could take one path, like in the next milestone, we have like 3 or 4 good ideas here. What would others in this call be passionate about, like pushing forward? Just adding the data to the table, adding a second column, putting it in a tooltip or not in a tooltip.
I would vote the customizable or buildable columns as
Okay.
like the real thing that needs to be done, just because I've had to butcher tables a number of times since I've been here 2 years. And it's like, when is it going to stop?
Okay.
Austin, I think well, okay. And if you add, and I think this could be like maybe a step towards what Daniel's saying, like if you add a column, then maybe you could also kind of like add a sub classification to the point earlier that you were a little worried about, that like, oh, this one is a setting and then this one is the project, right, within the column. So maybe you can even add a little bit more information if you kind of space out. Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Right time.
It's hard. You and I are both like, wait, let's just fix the component to solve this.
everything. Yeah. I love it. Love it.
That's good
Catch
to
y'all
know.
next week.
Yeah, great. Have a great week.